Okay, my name is Shonda Watts, and I'm interviewing Susan Dvora. And Sue, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born in Chicago in 1938 on the Old West Side, and when I was a small baby, we moved to the North Side, and I grew up in Rogers Park. I raised my children in Skokie, and then lived in Evanston for a bit, and now I'm downtown, so I'm pretty much a Chicagoan all my life.
And when were you born?
In 1938 at what's now Loretto Hospital. It used to be called St. Francis Hospital out on the Old West Side.
Okay. Susan, how would you define feminism?
My understanding of feminism is that I believe that feminism is the equality of women to men in both opportunity, lifestyle, choice, and work.
And would you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to go into detail maybe about some advocacy or things that you've done to promote for women's rights?
I went back to school when I was 35. I went to night school at Eastern Illinois University, and I began to read women's literature, and I began to understand feminism, and it was at the height of the beginning of the height of the women's movement in the late 1970s, and I became an activist. And on a personal level, feminism saved my life and my sanity. On a professional level, feminism put me in touch with potential I didn't know I had. As an activist, I was moved to create a project that became national in scope, and I became a leader way beyond my capacity, but the opportunity was there, and I took it and created the first National Women's Center here in Illinois. So feminism opened up my world, my opportunity, my ability, and my potential, and I'm ever grateful to the women's movement.
And in all that, or even just in your life in general, have you faced any discrimination as a woman?
Well, I faced it in the last place I expected to face it. I think as a young woman, I'm sure my opportunities were limited and my aspirations were limited. We grew up in the 50s thinking we could be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher, but most of all, my peer group only wanted to be a housewife and a mother. And so I would say the society around me was giving me the messages that I should limit my dreams and I should limit what I wanted out of life. Probably because of those messages, I got married very, very young, much too young. And what I felt was the discrimination in my marriage. And that was such a shock and so hard to understand that it took me many, many years and the women's movement to begin to understand what that meant. When I was about 11, it must have been maybe 12, I developed early, and I remember walking the 8 blocks home from school, and a boy who was my sister's age, 3 years older, and his friends started teasing me on a corner, held my hands behind my back, and he started feeling out my breasts, and it was the most humiliating and scary possibility that a little girl could experience, and it stayed with me for a very long time. I do remember that.
So going into a different, realm, I know you talked about learning on your own about women in literature and things like that, but do you feel like you were taught enough in school through the system about important women in history?
No, in grade school and high school there was no real emphasis on that or exposure to it. My learning came when I went back to college, and partly I was taking sociology, and we were looking at society norms, and so I began to look at women's roles.
Mhm.
Then I took women's literature and began a journey to not only read for my class, but with such curiosity began to read on my own, and that's when I really began to study the women's movement and women in history. I found a heroine in an early activist, and I followed her work, and really opened my heart and my mind to women who had worked so hard against great odds for women's rights or to move women further, in the time that they were living in.
Good. So, with your children, how do you feel like the birth experience, was for you, as far as what was available for women in hospitals and medication for women and different options for birth?
My peer group was being told by their doctors that childbirth could be painless. Almost all of them went to the hospital, were drugged, and woke up after their children were born. I just lucked out with a doctor at Michael Reese Hospital who believed in childbirth by relaxation, and he sent me to a nurse who just passed away in her 90s a few years ago, and she had classes for women in how to have what's now called natural childbirth, what was then called childbirth by relaxation. It was a method of breathing and relaxing that came over from England. And I took that, and that gave me tremendous confidence. And Michael Reese was just opening the first rooming in where a mother could have her baby near her and nurse the baby or hold the baby or bring the baby into her bed. It was very different than just going down the hall to visit a baby in a big nursery.
Right.
And I was lucky that all three of my children were born by natural childbirth or childbirth by relaxation, and all three were exposed to rooming in. So I had an amazingly good experience, quite different than my peer group.
So it wasn't necessarily a midwife, though. It was just...
No, it was not a midwife. It was the doctor. But and the birth was probably pretty standard for a hospital. But I was encouraged to be awake and to be part of the process,
right,
and to hold my baby right away. And that was very new then, very new. Husbands were still not allowed in the delivery room, but they were allowed in the labor room, but not in the delivery room.
Okay. The last set of questions is about image, the media, advertising. So how do you feel about advertising and how women are portrayed in the media today?
I think there's some improvement, but for the most part, young women are still taught to idolize a kind of perfection that very few women in the world really possess. It makes them feel insecure, it makes them feel inadequate, it gives them a very poor body image. I know that happened to me way back when, and I think it's still happening. I do think there's more of an awareness from the attention to eating disorders and emotional issues in women, and perhaps more attention is given, but advertisers still have a way of making women feel that if they have a wrinkle or if they have a little cellulite, they're somehow less than perfect. I was just watching the movie Burlesque at the theater the other night, and all the close-ups of Cher showed her without one blemish and without one line in her face because of her plastic surgery.
Wow.
And yet it showed the men in the next screen talking to her. They had character lines and wrinkles and lines under their eyes, and somehow they had character, and they had personality by virtue of those imperfections.
Mm.
But in a woman, she had to be absolutely free of any blemish or wrinkle in order for her to feel good about herself, and that's kind of sad.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
For someone so successful to feel she has to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then those lines give you, that sense of character, that sense of been through things and, lived a full life. So that's really interesting. So, in that, I know you mentioned that you struggle with that a little as being younger. What did you do to kind of empower yourself as a woman and, kind of just rise above how women are portrayed in the media? I know you just said just accepting, growing in age and maturity, but anything else?
Well, I think I still struggle with it because of my early years. I think that it's a process and I'm a work in progress. But I think the first thing that really I had to face, because it was affecting my mental and physical health, was the idea that I had a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that came from reading a little book called The Yellow Wallpaper, which I strongly recommend most women to read, and
I love that.
reading Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own, and reading Gloria Steinem and people like that,
Mm-hmm.
reading about people like Ida Wells here in Chicago, and Jane Addams, and so many heroines, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Bella Abzug, and that gave me a voice. And as an activist on women's issues, I began to realize that I could have that voice at home, and that I think gave me the courage to raise my sons as feminists. I'd say my younger two more so than my older one, because he wasn't quite, he was like with the old mom, and the younger
Mm-hmm.
two were a little bit more of the feminist mom.
Right.
And I get a kick out of watching my sons talk about feminism and
Mm-hmm.
treat women in a whole different way than my husband's era.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very grateful for the women's movement, also for teaching me to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if we just teach women, that's no good. We have to teach men.
Exactly.
And I think the women's movement made a mistake in not emphasizing more teaching of men. So I hope I answered your question, but
No.
basically I think it was both the teaching it, going back to school, and my own quest for knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that then gave me the courage to change and to speak out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this for me. I know I've
That's
definitely
it?
learned. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
my, that was easy.
It was. I told you, and you were under 30 minutes.
Really? That's
Yeah.
great.
I know I've learned from you, and just all the things. You really didn't talk about South Africa that much, but
Well, see, that came later. By
right.
then I was a feminist, let's see, 86.
Mm-hmm.
I went to South Africa. I should have talked about South Africa because I brought all that knowledge and experience to the women I worked with in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to me. I was just telling someone this the other day. I'm sorry I didn't mention South Africa. I was thinking in my earlier years. But in South Africa, we would talk to the women about empowering themselves and about their rights, and we would try and help them get from step A to step B to, grow a little bit. And yet they would talk with such pride about how they got on their knees to serve their husband, because in their tribal nature,
Mm-hmm.
that was the custom. They didn't associate it the way we associate it with patriarchy and with chauvinism
Mm-hmm.
and with the lack of feminism, and the need for men to have women serve them and to have, put women down and everything. They didn't associate with that. That to them it was just a tradition,
Right.
and it was just part of their culture. They didn't realize that with that was coming a lot of power
Mm-hmm.
difference. And so yeah, there was a lot in South Africa having to do with feminism, but I didn't get that. Another assignment maybe you'll get in a few years, and then we'll talk about it.
Right. Oh wait, I never turned it off.
Oh no, did you get that?
So I got that. Great.
Okay, then edit out whatever you want.
Okay. Thanks again.
Oh, you're very welcome.